Why did Britain become the world's most powerful empire? Britain's quest to own everything. Once upon a drizzle, in a soggy corner of Europe, there sat a tiny island known mostly for tea, rain, and passive-aggressive manners. So how, and we mean how on earth, did this chilly little rock become the globe's most relentless land-hoarder, dominating trade routes, rewriting history, and slapping the Union Jack on every sunny beach it stumbled upon? Was it strategic genius? Sheer luck? Or just really aggressive tea salesmen with muskets? Welcome to the true-ish, slightly tea-spilled tale of how Britain, yes Britain, went from sheep herding and brawling with the French to commanding an empire so massive it literally couldn't fit into one time zone. What started as a nation of pirates, traders, confused colonists, and slightly unhinged monarchs soon became a globe-trotting, land-snatching megaforce powered by capitalism, cannons, and an unquenchable thirst for sugar. So much sugar. Why did Britain invade places for spices and then never use them in their food? What unholy alliance turned a trading company into a private army with better uniforms than most nations? And what in the royal heck happened between the East India Company, the slave trade, and that awkward moment when Britain had to pretend to be morally superior? From Ulster to India, the Caribbean to Cape Town, from the sweet, sticky profits of sugar plantations to the murky corridors of Parliament, we're peeling back the royal curtain on the empire that changed the world and still haunts your history books. So buckle up, polish your monocle, and prepare to uncover how the empire was built by spreadsheets and swords, why Napoleon's fall was Britain's ultimate glow-up, what the world looked like when all roads led to London. Because this isn't just the story of Britain. It's the story of the world's most ambitious overachiever, before it was cool. Once upon a muddy island. If you looked at a world map today and zoomed in on Britain, you'd likely see, well, not much. A modest, soggy cluster of islands drifting just off the coast of Europe. It's smaller than Madagascar, less sunny than Spain, and more obsessed with talking about the weather than actually changing it. But 100 years ago, this island wasn't just sipping tea. It was pouring it all over the world, whether anyone asked for it or not. The British Empire, ladies and gentlemen, wasn't just big, it was massive, titanic, Thanos-snapping kind of dominant. It ruled a quarter of the Earth's land and nearly a third of the world's people, all while claiming it was doing everyone a favor. How did it happen? Magic? A secret potion? A mysterious imperial Hogwarts? No, the story is much messier, bloodier, and more British than that. Let's rewind. Before Britain was a household name, the true star of the show was England, that southern part of the British Isles where people wore itchy wool, spoke Middle English, and fought each other over sheep and taxes. England wasn't always the richest, but it was the scrappiest. By the late Middle Ages, it had already wrestled Wales into submission and stuck its fingers into Ireland's affairs. Scotland, meanwhile, was like that proud neighbor with a chip on its shoulder and a claymore under the bed. England kept invading, and Scotland kept saying, "Try me, mate." But here's the twist. In 1603, the two kingdoms united crowns. Why? Because Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen of England, died without a Netflix subscription, or more importantly, without children. So the throne went to her nearest and most Scottish relative, James VI of Scotland, who instantly became James I of England. And just like that, the crowns were united. Kind of like Batman and Superman teaming up, but still keeping separate apartments. So what did James I do with his newfound Britishish power? He looked west and east, and then everywhere else. The 16th and 17th centuries were the Wild West of global exploration. Spain and Portugal were gobbling up the Americas like it was a buffet. France was playing catch-up. And England? It sent a bunch of enthusiastic gentlemen with names like Sir Francis Drake and Sir Martin Frobisher, whose main qualifications were owning a ship, having a death wish, being fine with robbing the Spanish blind. They claimed territories, planted flags, and occasionally founded colonies, like Roanoke in 1585, which vanished faster than your last paycheck. The colonists literally disappeared without a trace. We still don't know where they went. Aliens? Natives? Went out for milk and never came back? But the real turning point wasn't lost colonies. It was money. This is where things get juicy. Elizabeth I, in her brilliance, and probably out of sheer lack of funds, began issuing royal charters to companies, basically legal permission to trade, explore, or conquer in the Queen's name. Companies like the Levant Company, 1592, and the soon-to-be infamous East India Company, 1600, were granted monopolies. Yes, monopolies, on all English trade to huge swaths of the globe. In modern terms, imagine Amazon getting exclusive rights to all commerce in Asia. That's how powerful these guys were. They weren't just trading spices and silks. They were colonizing, negotiating with kings, and when diplomacy failed, building private armies and overthrowing local rulers. All in the name of commerce and queen. But before England got too comfy in the tropics, it tried its hand at empire building closer to home, Northern Ireland, and thus enters the plantation of Ulster, a bold, messy, and slightly chaotic experiment that would lay the groundwork for British colonization across the globe. Imagine being King James I, formerly James VI of Scotland, in the early 1600s. You've just inherited both England and Scotland like a family member receiving two wildly dysfunctional estates. The Irish, especially in the northern province of Ulster, are fiercely independent, Catholic, and frankly not thrilled by your new royal plans. They had just rebelled in the 9 Years' War and been crushed by English forces, so James thought, why not solve rebellion with real estate? And so, the plantation of Ulster was born. Here's the pitch. Take rebellious Irish land, boot out the Catholic chiefs, and repopulate it with good, loyal Protestants from England and Scotland who will farm the land, praise the king, and not rebel every other Tuesday. It was the first time England had ever organized systematic colonization. Land was surveyed, divided into neat parcels, and handed out to English and Scottish settlers like door prizes at a royal gala. Forts were built, churches rose from the mud, and towns like Londonderry popped up, shaped to reflect the order and ideals of Protestant Britain. But Ulster wasn't just about taking land. It was a blueprint, an early test run, a how-to guide on colonial domination that England would later export to America, Africa, and Asia. And many of the men who led the Ulster plantation would go on to found colonies in Virginia and the Caribbean. From Gaelic hills to global empire, who would have guessed? With a successful plantation under its belt, England was now confident enough to start planting its flags abroad, starting with North America and the Caribbean. Now, let's not pretend it was all smooth sailing. The Roanoke colony vanished mysteriously, probably eaten by mosquitoes, bears, or boredom. But practice makes perfect, and England was very stubborn. So they tried again and again. Eventually, success came in the form of Virginia, named after Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. Ironic, considering how much the colonists were about to get screwed by malaria and starvation. Barbados, Jamaica, and other sugar-sweet islands in the Caribbean. And New York, which they casually stole from the Dutch in 1665 like a kid snatching a toy at recess. And while they were at it, England realized, why just conquer when we can also trade and profit? Cue the rise of corporate colonization, most notably through the East India Company, a monstrous hybrid of Walmart, the mafia, and a private army. But before we get to the curry and spices, let's make a brief stop on the coast of West Africa. Ah yes, here comes the darkest chapter. In 1660, England founded the Royal African Company with one horrifying purpose: to dominate the transatlantic slave trade. Ships sailed from England with manufactured goods, traded them in Africa for enslaved people, transported those human beings to plantations in the Americas, and returned home with sugar, tobacco, and cotton. It was the triangle of trade: efficient, horrific, and highly profitable. Cities like Liverpool and Bristol were built on the backs of it, and the wealth it generated supercharged the British economy. All of this was powered by British naval supremacy, the unchallenged command of the high seas. If there was an ocean nearby, you could bet your powdered wig that the Royal Navy was there, waving the Union Jack and collecting taxes. Across the border, the Scots were watching all this with a mixture of awe and jealousy. England is raking in riches from colonies. Why not us? They thought. So in 1698, they launched their own empire-starting attempt, the Darien Scheme. The idea? Establish a Scottish colony in Panama to control the trade route between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It was a bold plan. Too bold. They raised almost a fifth of Scotland's entire wealth from public investors. Blacksmiths, nobles, even churchmen put their savings into this project. 5 ships, 2,500 settlers, dreams of gold and spices, and not a single mosquito net. The colony Caledonia was built in the worst place possible. Humid jungles, Spanish territory, no good water. Within months, disease, hunger, and enemy attacks turned the dream into a nightmare. By the end, only a few hundred limped back home. Scotland was financially ruined. So, what does a bankrupt, empire-hungry nation do next? They join the empire. In the aftermath of the Darien disaster, Scotland signed the Acts of Union with England in 1707. The result? One kingdom, Great Britain. One flag, one parliament, one giant imperial shopping cart. Now, with Scottish brains, English money, and shared ambition, Britain would become an unstoppable colonial juggernaut. From here, the empire exploded. After the War of the Spanish Succession ended in 1714, a war that might as well have been called Europe's loudest family dispute over inheritance, Britain and her allies walked away like smug aristocrats who just inherited the best chunk of Grandpa Spain's estate. France and Spain had to cough up some precious pieces of territory. Newfoundland and Acadia in North America? Snatched. Gibraltar and Minorca in the Mediterranean? Claimed like prime beachfront property. Gibraltar, by the way, became Britain's middle finger to Spain for the next 300 years and counting, a rock of defiance where the Union Jack still flaps with a cheeky grin. Meanwhile, in India, a group of powdered-wigged accountants who were somehow allowed to have armies, the British East India Company, were engaged in something between monopoly and mortal combat with their French counterparts. The defining moment came in 1757 at the Battle of Plassey, which might as well have been titled How to Conquer Bengal with bribery, betrayal, and a bit of British luck. A few cannonballs and several betrayals later, the British controlled Bengal, a land teeming with silk, spices, and yes, taxation opportunities. Thus began a corporate colonization spree that would make Amazon look humble. With a private army larger than most European states, the company either ruled directly or dangled puppet rulers on strings, grinning behind the curtains. The 18th century was like a global pub brawl between empires, and Britain was always ready with a clenched fist and a cannon. 2 major wars fueled Britain's imperial rise. War of Austrian Succession, 1740 to 1748, a royal drama about a woman, Maria Theresa, daring to sit on a throne. Gasp! Scandal! War! The 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763. Think of it as World War II. It was fought everywhere. North America, India, the Caribbean, the Atlantic, Europe. It was global imperial chess, and Britain checkmated everyone. In North America, the British captured Quebec in 1759, a turning point with bagpipes and bayonets, and swallowed up New France by 1760. Meanwhile, Spain, always late to the colonial cocktail party, had to surrender Florida to Britain, who now owned practically the entire eastern seaboard. The Treaty of Paris, 1763, handed Britain even more sweets from the colonial jar. Dominica, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Tobago, basically the Caribbean candy shop. Britain wasn't just winning battles, it was assembling the infinity gauntlet of empire. With unmatched naval supremacy thanks to its growing navy and trade networks glistening across oceans, Britain became the ultimate colonial tycoon. Mercantile dominance powered its wealth. A constant flow of tea, sugar, textiles, and oh yes, slaves. Enter the Royal African Company, which, very darkly, capitalized on the transatlantic slave trade, a brutally profitable engine behind Britain's Caribbean sugar wealth. But here's the kicker. Britain got greedy with its colonies. The 13 colonies in America, once loyal tea-drinking subjects, got annoyed. Why? Because Britain decided to tax them without asking. The historical equivalent of eating someone's lunch and billing them for it. No taxation without representation, they cried, while chucking tea into Boston Harbor like it was a pool party. The result? The American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. Britain tried to beat sense into its rebellious teenagers, but after 8 years, the colonies stormed out and became the United States of America. Oops. With America lost, Britain looked east and said, well then, shall we take the rest of the world? Captain James Cook explored the Pacific, charmingly discovering places already very inhabited, like New Zealand and Australia. Australia, by the way, was turned into a giant open-air prison because why waste ships on just fish and rum? In 1788, the first convicts arrived at New South Wales, establishing a new society of thieves, jailers, and kangaroos. Back in North America, explorers like George Vancouver pushed west across the Rockies, ensuring Britain could still say, "We've got a piece of that too." Then came the French Revolution, and a man with one hand in his coat, Napoleon Bonaparte. Britain wasn't having it. War broke out in 1803, and Britain poured money, ships, and sass into defeating Napoleon. The crown jewel of this effort was Trafalgar, 1805, the most epic naval showdown of the age, where Admiral Lord Nelson, shot in battle, reportedly whispered, "Kiss me, hearty," before dying a hero's death and securing British naval dominance for the next 140 years. Picture it. 1815. Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who tried to give Europe a French makeover, had just been thoroughly trampled at Waterloo. The Allies, Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia, stood over his fallen empire, each licking their chops like vultures over a croissant. And what did Britain do? They didn't just take a victory lap. They opened the imperial buffet and helped themselves to the best tropical desserts. The Ionian Islands? Bagged. Malta? Mauritius? Seychelles? St. Lucia? Scooped up like exotic ice cream flavors. Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Cape Colony, and Ceylon? Why, yes, we will have seconds. These weren't just pretty vacation spots with palm trees and parrots. They were global sugar factories, spice racks, tea gardens, and strategic naval hotspots. And Britain, with the grace of a pirate in a powdered wig, was now in charge of them all. Now let's talk sugar. Sugar was the cocaine of the 18th and 19th century. People loved it. Tea without sugar? Unthinkable. But this sweet addiction came with a brutal truth. It was built on slave labor. The Caribbean colonies were full of sugarcane plantations, and these relied entirely on enslaved Africans. Britain had already made a killing, literally and financially, from the transatlantic slave trade. But then came the Industrial Revolution, and suddenly British factories were pumping out textiles, iron goods, and machinery like a caffeinated chimney. Capitalists realized, wait, why buy expensive slave-grown sugar and cotton from Jamaica when I can exploit child labor right here in Manchester? It's cheaper and comes with smog. Meanwhile, abolitionists were loud. Think Wilberforce, Clarkson, and a whole league of top-hat-wearing moral crusaders holding candlelight vigils and pamphlet parades. So in 1807, under pressure from conscience and capitalism, Britain abolished the slave trade. Not slavery itself, just the shipping part. Slavery wouldn't be fully abolished in the empire until 1834, after more campaigning, riots, and a healthy dose of guilt from Bible quotes. Welcome to the imperial century, 1815 to 1914, where Britain behaved like a monopoly player who already owned Mayfair and decided to grab every train station too. They just choked Napoleon's empire and thought, well, what now? So they turned their eyes to India. Already Britain's glittering crown jewel, now getting deeper under the Queen's thumb. Singapore, 1819, a steamy pirate-ridden port turned into a British cash register by Sir Stamford Raffles. Hong Kong, 1842, seized after the First Opium War, because yes, Britain literally went to war with China so they could keep selling them opium. Like your drug dealer suing you for quitting. Back in India, the British East India Company was acting like a private army meets Walmart. But in 1857, their own sepoy troops rebelled after being asked to bite cartridges greased with cow and pig fat. Holy beef, unholy bacon. Both were offensive to Hindus and Muslims alike. The sepoy rebellion was bloody, terrifying, and sent a clear message. Company rule sucks. By 1858, the British Crown stepped in. Right, hand over the keys. You're fired. India was now officially British, and Victoria was later declared Empress of India, because why not throw in a title? Now enter the Russians, stage left. Russia wanted to take advantage of the Ottoman Empire, which was collapsing like a flan in a cupboard. The Tsars wanted access to warm water ports, and that threatened British access to India. So Britain, always the drama queen, joined France in the Crimean War, 1853 to 1856, to spank Russia. And they did. Barely. It was muddy, mismanaged, and full of mustaches, but a victory nonetheless. Then came the Great Game, a Cold War before Cold Wars were cool. Britain and Russia drew lines in Central Asia to avoid Wu-Tui 100 years early. Meanwhile, in Africa, British settlers had swarmed the Cape Colony like sunburned ants. Dutch-descended Boers weren't happy, so they packed up and founded their own republics, Transvaal and Orange Free State. But when gold and diamonds were discovered, now Britain was interested. After 2 Boer wars, one a bit messy, the second a PR disaster, by 1902 the Boers had lost and the British flag waved over South Africa. The Suez Canal, 1869. The shortcut that made the British Empire's heart beat faster. It was built by the French, but guess who occupied Egypt in 1882? Yep, the British. Just protecting our investment, they claimed, while not leaving for another 70 years. As for the rest of Africa, the late 19th century saw a mad dash called the Scramble for Africa. European powers carved it up like a birthday cake, and Britain took the eastern and southern slices. A bold railway project was proposed, Cape to Cairo, a single iron artery to bind the continent. It was never finished, but it made for excellent propaganda. By 1902, the British had connected their empire with the All-Red Line, a telegraph network, so Britain could bark orders to every colony at once. Think 19th century Wi-Fi for world domination. And let's not forget the white settler colonies like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. They were getting rowdy, asking for self-rule. Britain gave them dominion status, which was basically, fine, run your own affairs, but no foreign policy unless we say so. Ireland, however, asked for home rule and got a firm nope, until things escalated later, of course. Then came World War I, 1914 to 1918, and Britain turned to the empire like a panicked parent calling their kids for help moving house. Over 2.5 million men from India, Canada, Australia, South, and New Zealand fought bravely. Many died. Gallipoli, the Somme, and more. Imperial blood soaked European soil. Britain won, but oh boy, it was expensive. Economically, it was like mortgaging Buckingham Palace. They gobbled up Ottoman and German colonies in Africa and the Middle East, but the strain was obvious. By 1921, Britain had hit peak empire, the biggest it ever got. But then, Ireland became independent, the first domino. World War II, 1939 to 1945, nearly broke Britain. They were technically victorious, but totally bankrupt. And the colonies saw it. Wait, the mighty empire needs American loans to survive? From the 1940s to 1970s, one by one, colonies walked out the imperial front door. India left in 1947 with a traumatic partition, then Africa followed. The wind of change swept through, but they didn't slam the door. Most became part of the Commonwealth, a polite political club where they drink tea and wave at the Queen, or now King Charles III. The last great symbolic moment came in 1997, when Britain handed back Hong Kong to China, after 156 years of rule that started with an opium-fueled war. Crowds cried, bagpipes played, the Union Jack came down in silence. And just like that, 400 years of empire building ended not with a bang, but with a ceremony. Today, the British Empire is gone, but its shadow stretches long. English is the world's most spoken second language. Cricket is played in the most unexpected places. British law, tea time, and queuing etiquette still linger globally. From Napoleon to Hong Kong, from sugar to telegraphs, Britain rose, ruled, and retreated, but left the world forever changed.